All rise. Veuillez vous lever. Please be seated.
You may proceed, Mr. Mladić.
Thank you, Your Honors. I neglected to mention the transcript page of the selection I just read out for General Nikolai. It is transcript page 10,654 of our transcript. And it's been brought to my attention at temporary transcript page 7, line 13, I used PTT building when I should have used RTV building when referring to Mr. Weber's comments from the other day. And now I'll continue. So from this testimony of Nikolai, we see that Colonel Karamans was ordered by his UN superiors to negotiate for what the UN wanted, which was the cooperation of the VRS to get the Bosnian Muslim civilians out of Potocari. Again, if there is a criminal order for any removal of people from Srebrenica, it does not bear Mr. Mladić's signature. It bears a UN stamp. If we can go to the next slide. Then we have the prosecution's own trial video, P1147, and here we have a portion from the transcript dealing with Mr. Karamans, and this is Mr. Karamans speaking in the video. Quote, "Then I asked for let's say a team from the UNHCR and civil authorities which can deliver us the means like buses. The only thing I can do is studying the amount of persons, and for that amount of persons we need, let's say, transport, counting. But if it's possible, I can ask for buses through my own authorities, let's say military authorities. But I really don't know what they can give me. I don't know yet. We are busy with determining which people like to go where. But that needs time, and I don't know, of course, what is possible in that way. But I presume that is something which Mr. Mladić can tell. I don't know where they'd like to go. Then we make let's say, a plan for evacuation, which persons do need to go first because of age, illness, etc." End quote. Now again, notice no one is using the word deportation nor forcible transfer. It's always evacuation. Mr. Mladić, who is mentioned, you will recall, is a representative of the Bosnian Muslim civilians themselves. So again, we have here an alternate reasonable conclusion under the evidence that the Bosnian Muslim civilians were voluntarily determining where they wanted to go. Reasonable doubt exists, and acquittal is warranted. If we can go to the next slide. Now, Colonel Boring of Dutch Bat likewise testified, and just after having watched this very same segment of the Srebrenica trial video, which we just read from the transcript of, he testified as follows at transcript page 10,067 to 10,068. Answer. We prepared the second meeting. We discussed various organizations who might possibly offer support. Then requests to go to Tuzla, Sarajevo. These requests, we also discussed various organizations. But a real plan, that's something I cannot recollect in detail. It was more in general. We mentioned organizations and a way to get out of it. Question. Lieutenant Colonel Karamans says that drafting any evacuation plan would involve establishing the priorities of those people who wanted to leave. When you were preparing for this meeting, did you ever discuss priorities and how they would be determined? Answer, yes. I can remember that we discussed this, that we were going to transfer the wounded first, and then the elderly, and then, at the final stage, the healthy people. So there were some priorities set there, but I don't know how much detail we went when establishing it all. So, Your Honors, from this we see requests were being received to go to Tuzla and Sarajevo, and recall from the evidence that these were both ABIH-held areas. So again, people are voluntarily selecting where to go. Now, let's finally get to what Mr. Mladić actually said on the topic. We saw last week, the third Fontana meeting, that nothing improper was suggested in that meeting. Again, expert Butler told us about that. And I'd like to go to the next slide. This is an encounter between Mr. Kuster and Mr. Mladić from the Srebrenica trial video, Elko Kuster of Dutch Bat. And this is misrepresented by the prosecution at paragraph 1200 and 629 of their brief. Now, as to the video, Your Honors will recall, and you see it in the transcript of the video, that the real-time translation received by Mr. Kuster by the translator on site in Potocari is incorrect and misinterprets General Mladić as essentially saying that they would board everyone on the buses, when in fact, during our trial and with the revised Srebrenica trial video, this translation was corrected to reflect what General Mladić really said, which is, quote, "We will board everyone who wants it," end quote. Now, this incident gives us several things to think about. Dutch Bat members on the ground, based upon this clearly faulty translation, cannot be relied upon to correctly describe General Mladić's words and therefore his intent, because we cannot exclude the possibility that this same faulty translator messed up other words of General Mladić that are not recorded on film, for which we don't have the ability to go back and check now, but which Dutch Bat members like Leandert van Doon have in their mind and testified about. But another thing strikes me about this mistranslation. The mistranslation resembles the purported intercept P1236 cited by the prosecution. And again, for that intercept, there is no recording of Mladić allegedly saying what is there, and albeit it's in the Croatian, not the Serbian language, which raises other doubts, but that intercept in essence says that the Serbs would evacuate those that wanted to and those that did not. So given that this tape with the updated and corrected translation only came into existence recently, can we exclude the possibility of someone at the ABIH or perhaps an international agency doctoring and faking intercepts to fit the accusations of forcible transfer against Mladić, relying on the prior version of the tape with the faulty translation, or perhaps hoping that the faulty translation will be used to support the authenticity of that intercept? Because I can't remove that possibility from my mind. Again, reasonable doubt. Now, let's look at the other footage from Potocari, which the prosecution edited out of its presentation last week. I would ask to go to the next slide. The transcripts have been provided.
Mladić, anyone who wishes to be transported will be transported, be the person small, big, old, or young. The crowd, thank you, thank you. Mladić, don't be afraid. Slowly, slowly, let the women and children go first. 30 buses will arrive, and we will transport you towards Kladen. From there, you will pass onto the territory controlled by Alia's forces. Just don't panic, and let the little children and the women go first. Be careful not to lose a child. Do not be afraid. Nobody will harm you. The crowd, thank you, thank you. Man from the crowd, may you live long. Journalist, General, After the liberation of Srebrenica, there are several thousand Muslim civilians who are located here. What will become of them? Mladić. Well, I have received the representatives of this population here today, and they have asked me to enable the civilians who want to leave this territory to cross over into the territory controlled by Muslims and Croats. Our army wasn't aiming to fight the civilians or the UNPROFOR forces. We have organized transport for them, food, water, and medicine. In the first round today, we will evacuate women, children, and the elderly, as well as other people who want to leave this combat zone of their own free will, without any coercion.
Koliko ti je godina? Kako ti ime? Molim vas, budite veoma strpljivi.
How old are you? 12. Please be patient. Anybody who wishes to stay can stay. Anybody who wishes to leave this territory can leave this territory. We have provided enough buses and trucks. You will be transported to Kladan. Just take it slowly.
So just to make clear, we just heard General Mladić repeat that people had a choice to stay or to go, just as he told civilian representatives at the third Hotel Fontana meeting. The gathered Bosnian Muslim civilians are heard to express gratitude and bless General Mladić for his words and behavior towards them. This is the very same General Mladić who sits before you today and who patiently and with great discomfort had to listen to the prosecution's hurtful accusations last week. If anyone in this courtroom deserves to feel insulted about the insinuations of forcible removals, it is General Mladić. For your honors, as we have seen, the decision to have people leave Srebrenica was made first and foremost by the inhabitants of Srebrenica themselves and by the ABIH forces therein. Then the UN ordered that they be evacuated and tasked Colonel Karamans to present this as a complete plan, as a fait accompli, to General Mladić and ask for help for a humanitarian evacuation. General Mladić agreed to help and personally undertook to mobilize buses on short order. How can one conclude from this evidence that everyone who planned and ordered the departures and presented them to Mladić is a saint, and Mladić is to be the devil, guilty of the crime of forcible transfers? We just cannot accept that. Not unless, again, it is the Serbs that are guilty, even for things that are called humanitarian if you do them and you're not a Serb. However, if you do not believe this, an acquittal is required. Now I'd like to shift gears a bit and talk about the so-called JCE to eliminate or murder the men of Srebrenica. And I've already mentioned that Mr. McCloskey made up the story about the dinner between Krstić and Mladić in calm surroundings. He described it, etc., the other day in his closing. Let's look at what they actually said in the prosecution final brief. This is paragraphs 1063 and 1105. Let's look at the first one first. Quote, sometime between the evening of 11 July and the morning of 12 July, Mladić and other JCE members developed concrete plans to detain and summarily execute large numbers of Muslim men and boys and forcibly transport to BIH territory the women and children of Srebrenica, end quote. How telling is this? After all this time, the prosecution concedes it does not even know when the plan was created. So again, this cute little fantasy of a dinner, it's all made up. Reasonable doubt exists, an acquittal is mandated. Now let's look at the second paragraph on this slide, also from the prosecution brief, 1105. Quote, and I'm going to read the highlighted portion, quote, "Up until that point, the objective was to permanently, forcibly remove the Bosnian Muslim population from Srebrenica. Soon after Mladić and the other JCE members became aware of the large number of men and boys in Potocari, a JCE was created with the common criminal purpose of eliminating Bosnian Muslims in Srebrenica." At paragraph 1175, the prosecution says that this happened sometime between the evening of 11 July and the third Hotel Fontana meeting at 10 a.m. on the 12th of July. So in their final brief, Your Honors, the prosecution concedes that there can be no JCE to kill but for this mysterious meeting that they cannot locate any evidence about, but that they're sure happened. By the way, this means what I told you last week is true. The statement of Mr. Mladić to the camera, as he's still in Srebrenica, the one about it's time to take revenge on the Turks, cannot be tied to any JCE to commit genocide or kill, since it predates this mysterious meeting between the evening of 11 July and 12 July that the prosecution says is the actual start date for that JCE. Remember, reasonable doubt mandates acquittal. Now let's try to find this mysterious meeting where everyone had to talk about and decide to form and enter into this JCE to eliminate. Because without this meeting, the prosecution's case is lost. Paragraph 1175 of the prosecution brief says, quote, "In deciding to kill the able-bodied men in Potocari, Mladić would have consulted with Krstić and his senior intelligence and security officers present in Bratunac, Popović, Kosorović, and Janković," end quote. And then, to support that allegation, they have a footnote relating to various testimony of General Mladić. Unfortunately, none of those several references to General Mladić's testimony say anything about this which is cited in the prosecution's brief. Again, the prosecution makes up its case when it doesn't have the evidence. Various evidence of the meeting held at the Fontana Hotel on the evening of 11 July 1995 provides for the reasonable conclusion that no such criminal plan was discussed nor agreed to at this meeting. To start with, it should be noted that even the prosecution's star insider witness, Momir Nikolić, fails to allege that anything criminal was discussed at this meeting on the 11th. Nikolić was not present, but he saw the accused, General Krstić, the commanders of the groups of each brigade who were participating in the Srebrenica operation, so Pandurović, Blagojević, Tribić, Andrić. According to Momir Nikolić, this meeting took place around 1700 or 1800 hours, when it was still light, before the meeting at the Fontana Hotel on the same day, and we get that from D1228. Afterwards, Nikolić found out from Blagojević about what was said at the meeting, namely that the Srebrenica operation was analyzed, and there was a conflict between Blagojević and Krstić because they disagreed on the Bratunac Brigade's participation, and then a discussion about the Žepa operation started, and Pandurović did not want to start Žepa until the column of the 28th Division had been dealt with. So again, Nikolić can't provide evidence of a meeting where crimes were discussed. Several witnesses testified that they were present for or heard of a meeting that same evening, the 11th, where nothing criminal was discussed, and rather the plans for Žepa were discussed, which is, again, what Nikolić says was discussed. These are Colonel Andrić, D1033, paragraph 19. Milenko Yevgevich, transcript page 32059 onwards. Miodrag Dragutinovich, who told us that Pandurovich discussed the meeting with him, transcript page 32241 to 32242. The prosecution claims that all these witnesses are lying and that the meeting that they are talking about actually took place on 12 July, based solely on P1467, the diary of a Colonel Trivich, that has a meeting on 12 July, which is similar in nature. It is interesting, however, that in saying that everyone is lying, the prosecution does not include Mummer Nikolic and never addresses his testimony that nothing criminal was discussed on the evening of 11 July. But there's one problem with that position, Your Honors. The prosecution says everyone is to be disbelieved, but the diary is said to be credible, reliable, written in great detail and precision, and accurate. And that's at paragraph 1216 of their final brief. But this very same diary has no meeting on the 11th of July, nor at any time where any JCE to kill the inhabitants of Srebrenica is discussed. So where is this affirmative proof establishing beyond reasonable doubt the meeting, the genesis of their JCE is alleged? Simply put, they do not present any. Irrespective of the dates, no evidence links General Mladić to any meeting when this crime was discussed, when this JCE would have been entered into. Now, having determined that this mystery meeting had to have happened, the prosecution uses it to discount the words of General Mladić at the third Fontana meeting, where he gives a choice to the Bosnian Muslims to stay or go. And the prosecution says, no, that's false. Quote, he clearly had no intention to allow any Muslims to stay, end quote. That's paragraph 1171 of their brief. In essence, the prosecution uses this mysterious, unproved, uncorroborated meeting anytime that General Mladić says something that is favorable to say he must be lying because it was determined otherwise at this meeting. Anytime the prosecution presents two alternatives, the prosecution is admitting reasonable doubt exists. Now, if we can go to the next slide. The words and deeds of General Mladić repeatedly reinforce that he had no criminal intent as to captured Bosnian Muslim POWs in Srebrenica before he departed for Belgrade. The evidence is also clear that General Mladić personally had no contemporary knowledge of any of the crimes he is charged with. Rather, the consistent evidence of both prosecution and defense witnesses is that the accused gave legitimate and appropriate orders for treatment of detained members of the 28th Division. Multiple witnesses, both prosecution and defense, talked about how the accused foresaw their treatment as POWs and then their exchange with the other side. RM-292 described how the accused spoke to POWs at Novokasaba and said, quote, prisoners do not need to be afraid because they would return to their houses and be exchanged, end quote. That's at transcript page 12659. RM-292 further testified that the detainees applauded the accused. That's on transcript page 12662.
Mr. Mladić, you're talking about RM-292.
That's correct.
Look at page 53, line 25, and make sure that that's the correct number. It says 229.
I apologize, Your Honors, if I
No,
misspoke.
I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just saying check what is on the screen with what you want to say.
Thank you, Your Honors. To be clear, I'm talking about RM-292.
Thank you.
Notably, the witness did not identify any illegal orders of the accused as to the POWs. Another witness, Subotic, himself a military policeman, confirmed that at Nova Kasaba, the accused told POWs that they would be exchanged and that they applauded him. That's at transcript page 32826, 32827. Subotic further confirmed that the accused said the POWs would be transported to Bertunac, housed, fed, and transferred to civilian authorities for the taking of information and to be exchanged. That's in D926, paragraphs 29 through 30. Then the express orders of the accused to the military police present was to provide physical protection to the POWs, and as described by Subotic, quote, and he told us strictly to take care of the prisoners, that some buses would be arriving within an hour, that the men should sign their names, and that they should all board the bus and deliver it to the civilian police in Bertunac. That is what I heard, and I saw this when General Mladić was present there at the stadium, end quote. Transcript page 32826, 32827. According to the evidence, Subotic followed these legitimate orders of the accused, providing water for the detainees and protecting the same until handing them over to the civilian police. D926, paragraph 31. Thus we have evidence of express orders of the accused that run counter to the commission of any killings or crimes. There's also evidence that wounded persons present at this site were provided medical treatment and or sent to the hospital. D926, paragraph 32 through 36. Such acts are consistent with the accused's words that these POWs would be treated properly and exchanged, and are inconsistent with any plans to kill. RM-346 was a POW at Nova Kasaba, and he too confirms what Subotic and RM-292 stated about the express words of the accused. Specifically, RM-346 stated the accused said that they would go for lunch to Bertunac and would all later be exchanged.
Are you referring to RM-346 or RM-364?
I have written down here in my notes 346, but I see on the screen 364. I can clarify that by saying I'm referring to Exhibit P1118, page 9. And that should hopefully apply to only one witness, unless we have bigger problems.
Your team may be able to clarify it.
Maybe. It's RM-346. RM-253 likewise was at Nova Kasaba, and he reiterated hearing the accused express, quote, "You do not have to worry. You will be exchanged and join your families in Tuzla. Now you'll be transported by trucks to Bertunac or Kravica, where you will spend the night and get some food," end quote. And that is at T12532 and P1547, paragraph 20. Witness Jovcic, the driver for MUP Commander Borovchinin, recalled the accused speaking to detainees of the 28th Division at Sandici Meadows, at which time the accused also specified that, quote, transport of their women and children towards Kladanie and Tuzla was in progress, and that they would be transported, end quote. There is no credible evidence linking General Mladic's presence to any of the alleged killing or execution sites, or evidencing his contact with any POWs apart from that which we have just discussed. The above demonstrates the express orders of the accused that did not include any orders to kill. Momir Nikolic is the only witness who claimed to have a nonverbal hand gesture. Just to be clear, he described it as thus. From the accused, which Nikolic interpreted, that hand gesture, as meaning that all would be killed. But the preposterous nature of his testimony and the dubious credibility of Mladić are discussed in detail in our final brief. In fact, much of the prosecution's evidence about orders given to VRS personnel, allegedly from the accused, as to the Srebrenica killings, originate in one way or another from the dubious and discredited Mladić. As such, it is a reasonable conclusion that Mladić, in fact, was promoting a false notion. We cannot stress enough that despite Muammar Nikolić's self-serving testimony about some sort of hand gesture, he testified that he never received a direct order from anyone, that includes Mladić, to commit the killings in Srebrenica, which Nikolić went on to do. That's D1228, page 3. So again, Nikolić admits participating in killings, admits he never got an order to do so. The claim that a hand gesture like this one could be interpreted as an order to kill is not even made by Muammar Nikolić. But that doesn't stop this prosecution from trying to use the same to invent a kill order that does not exist. Such a position is preposterous. Mladić could have been telling Nikolić, "Go away and leave me alone." He could have been saying incredulously, "Weren't you just listening to what I told them?" He could have been saying, "I have no time for your stupid question." Reasonable doubt exists. In any event, OTP investigator Bruce Bursick made clear that the prosecution could not corroborate that the purported encounter of Muammar Nikolić and Mladić at the roadside ever even happened. Nikolić's story of why he was there changes. In one version, he was ordered there by Colonel Blagojevich. In the other, he was ordered there by his own subordinate within the military police. Neither makes sense. Plus, Mr. Bursick confirmed that Mladić never mentioned the infamous hand gesture except Let me start again. Mr. Bursick confirmed that Muammar Nikolić never mentioned the purported hand gesture by Mladić, except in that, for the first time in that one interview, that the prosecution decided not to record, and that Muammar Nikolić was generally evasive and not forthcoming. Your Honors, however you look at the evidence of Muammar Nikolić, reasonable doubt creeps in. Thus, the prosecution's evidence, when taken at its highest, demonstrates a set of facts where the explicit words of the accused directed towards the detained POWs of the 28th Division that they would be exchanged and reunited with their families. Such words exclude the possibility that he intended to kill them or knew of any plans to kill them. Absent any explicit orders to the contrary, this evidence must be accepted as indicating the accused did not issue any orders nor intend the deaths of these individuals. Now, I want to just touch on some of the alleged murders. We have dealt with each in detail in our brief, but let's highlight Kravica, because that is where I am flabbergasted and at a loss for words at what the prosecution claims. Your Honors will recall that we heard evidence, and it was conceded by Mr. McCloskey the other day that hours after Mladić had left the area and is en route to Belgrade, a bus of detainees was being transported by the MUP to Kravica warehouse. And some Bosnian Muslim detainees overpowered the guards, grabbed the weapons, and engaged in a firefight with the guards, killing one, and then one guard burned his hand, taking back a gun, and the revolt was thus stopped. We have no way of knowing how many detainees died in the firefight before that situation was ended. And then we know and agree that after this, the MUP guards took revenge upon and killed countless detainees. The second set of killings can be nothing but a crime, but not one that was ordered by anyone. Now, last week, I listened to Mr. McCloskey tell you and the public that, quote, "It's the prosecution's case that this incident was an organized execution pursuant to orders, with the burn hands incident happening well after the executions had begun, and it was a desperate response by a Muslim man to the executions around him, not how they started, end quote. That's at transcript page 44544. Then he started telling everyone how this conclusion was, quote, obvious, end quote, from analyzing the evidence. And that's the next page, 44545. But no evidence has said that. If we can go to the next page, the slide. Let's look at Aaron Gallagher. Miss Gallagher is Mr. McCloskey's investigator for Kravica and Srebrenica. And God bless her for telling the truth. She was an honest prosecution member. And when first asked in cross-examination, quote, from your investigative work, have you gained knowledge about an incident where a group of detained Bosnian Muslim men tried to overpower the police guards that were guarding them, even taking the rifle of one guard and killing him, and where another guard was injured trying to get that rifle back? Are you aware of such an instance? Answer. I am aware of an instance at the Kravica warehouse where one Muslim man had grabbed the gun and Rade Čutarić had wrestled the gun away, and shortly after that, the men on that side of the warehouse that were kept there were killed. Question. And was it part of your investigation that prior to the incident where the individual tried to overpower and take the gun from this person, that no one had been shot at this location? Answer. There was not a mass execution prior to this execution. Not that I'm aware of, no. Later on in redirect, the prosecution counsel Vanderpooy and Ms. Gallagher admitted that there's not concrete information either way. And we see the part of that transcript right there. So apparently, what is obvious to Mr. McCloskey's colleagues and investigator is different than to him. Reasonable doubt exists when more than one possible conclusion exists. Now, just to complete the picture, let's look at Mr. McCloskey's other investigator who spent considerable time investigating Kravica, Mr. Tomas Blaszczyk. And at transcript page 12346 to 12347, he admitted that to him it was still an open question which happened first. Answer, well, Your Honors, our investigation revealed that this incident related to one guard who was killed by detainee, it happened. But when it happened, this is still open question for me. In fact, whether it happened because before that there was another killing take place, and whether this incident, this particular incident, kind of sparked, just the following events. It's just the killing of entire people, which were kept in Kravica warehouse. Is it worrying that prosecution counsel is molding the facts of their case to fit their theory, ignoring their own staff members who came as witnesses to give, Your Honors, evidence of these events? Case closed on Kravica. You must acquit. Now, as further indication of no prior intent for foul play, RM 274 described that the Kravica guards were consistently kind toward the detainees in the beginning, referencing that cigarettes and water were provided. This is at P3098, page 24. RM 274 estimates that this peaceful process continued 1.5 to 2 hours. P3098, page 19. No ill treatment is alleged as to this time period, and RM 274 reported that things only changed after an incident that made the guards angry when there was shooting outside. And RM-274 likewise recalls a wounded guard was brought in, and only after that incident that the guards came in acting frightened and in a panic and started shooting detainees in the warehouse. There's also evidence suggesting that prior to arriving, MUP Commander Borovchinin had no idea what was going on, and upon seeing the bodies at Kravica said, quote, "Oh my God, what is this?" That's transcript page 33729 to 33721, the testimony of his driver, Nejo Jovcic. Then Borovchin went to go tell civilian municipal leaders what had happened. All of this leads to the reasonable conclusion of the lack of any plan to kill these persons, and rather that an unfortunate act of revenge occurred when the attempted breakout occurred and when guards were killed and wounded. Mladić cannot be responsible for this under these facts. I want to just briefly touch on Turnovo. And the prosecution admitted last week, talking about Turnovo, quote, "And the Scorpions, I'm not going to show you that awful video, but please take care here. Sometimes, because that video is so clear and the Muslims are so obviously from Srebrenica, we have not laid out the facts and the details of that crime as much as we should have. We have now, but this needs to be done to fully understand that this was part of the murder operation, part of the JCE to eliminate," end quote. Your Honors, pay attention to what prosecution counsel just said. If they have conceded that they have not laid out the facts and details as they should have, they have not met their burden. Acquittal is warranted. I will not go through the other murder charges, but urge you to heed that which we have analyzed in our brief. We believe as to every such one, there remains serious doubts and ambiguities and even contradictions from the prosecution's evidence, such that reasonable doubt has not been removed and an acquittal is appropriate. And we also ask you to take note of the evidence as to Mr. Mladić's horrified reaction after returning from Belgrade, because that demonstrates that he certainly did not order the killing of anyone. The defense has also set out in pages 869 to 873 of the final brief the post factum matters that affected his ability to do anything after the fact. Now I'd like to return to the alibi, the time period when General Mladić left Srebrenica and was in Belgrade. First off, the prosecution has tried to point to Obradović's generic testimony to indicate that Mladić would not relinquish command unless gone for more than 7 days. Your Honors, why do they ignore the sworn testimony of their own witness, General Manojlo Milovanović, who testified under oath and without any qualms or reservations, and did not shirk from affirming that when Mladić was gone from the theater or from the RS, he, General Milovanović, assumed command and was in charge of the VRS. You see that at transcript page 11,751 and 16,950. And we also have to point out, if we can have the next slide, that the evidence is that rather than being involved in killings or at killing sites, General Mladić is at a secret meeting in Dubanovci, Belgrade, 14 to 15 July 1995, meeting with these UN and European negotiators and Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic. As part of this meeting, as D1413 evidences, General Mladić entered into an agreement with General Smith to allow ICRC access to the POWs detained at Srebrenica. Now, common sense and logic dictate that from this agreement, we can conclude that General Mladić has no idea about any plans to kill the POWs of Srebrenica. because otherwise he would be stupid to enter into such an agreement. The defense submits that this evidence leads to the reasonable conclusion that General Mladić honestly believed that his orders to treat the detained members of the 28th Division as POWs until their release with the other side, and that he had no idea that others were killing said persons. The document D1413 also identifies that Mladić wanted all generals of opposing sides to meet to finally do a complete cessation of hostilities. This is consistent with his words to detainees before he left Bosnia, that soon they would be exchanged with the other side. General Mladić had his mind set on a permanent and lasting peace, not on revenge nor atrocities. Why is the prosecution ignoring the evidence of this meeting, for which we have ample evidence, while pushing their mysterious meeting of 11 July, which is nowhere in the evidence? Because this meeting in Dubanovci establishes reasonable doubt. General Mladić's orders as to the POWs never changed, and that proves he did not have the intent to kill them. This was done by others, including Avengers, locals, and rogue members of the security organs. Now, just a few more points relating to Srebrenica. The bulk of the prosecution case revolves around purported radio relay communication intercepts, which we have in detail analyzed in our brief to demonstrate that pursuant to science, technology, and logic, they could not be intercepted by the ABIH or other parties as alleged. I would only add to that RM-275 is someone that the prosecution brought to authenticate some of these intercepts. However, their other witness, RM-279, disavowed that RM-275 could have been the drafter of the records in question. That's at transcript page 13557 to 13558. Both RM-279 and official records of the ABIH demonstrate that RM-275 wasn't even working in the interception unit during the time period of the intercepts in question. He started working there in 1996. D316, D1463. Accordingly, this raises significant and reasonable doubt as to the authenticity of these intercepts. We have also gone into great detail about the forensic evidence of the mass graves in our final brief. I will not belabor those points, but we do want to highlight some key points. First, the evidence demonstrates that in some of these mass graves, attributed to July 1995, human remains were found in ZOV body bags, P1737, P1983, P1448, P1987. We heard from Dr. Stankovic that he created and used these bags for remains in 1992, and that the supply was used up after 1993. Transcript page 43277, 43278. That would raise significant reasonable doubt that bodies in the mass graves could be inclusive of persons who died in the years prior, whose remains were commingled in the graves. And indeed, that conclusion is consistent with evidence presented by prosecution witnesses that Momir Nikolić, in fact, robbed graves from the years prior at the same time he robbed the Srebrenica graves. We can see that at transcript page 11485 to 11486. This set of facts thus calls into question the evidence of Srebrenica victims and calls for an acquittal.
Mr. Ivtic, before you continue, could you check the reference to D1413?
D1413. Yes? That's the meeting at Dubrovci.
For me, it's a witness statement by a witness.
I'll check on that. It should be a coded cable from Mr. Akashi to Mr. Anand. I will
At
definitely,
least in my e-court, it's not.
I will check that, Your Honor. Thank you
Please.
for bringing that to my attention. In the case, we have been talking for a long time about combat casualties of the 28th Division being included as victims of execution by the prosecution. During our proceedings, however, no fewer than 4 forensic professionals gave their expert opinions for what the prosecution calls blindfolds, evidencing executions, that they could actually be bandanas worn by fighters that fell over the eyes as the body and particularly the ears decayed. The late Dr. Dunic at D1448 and D1449. Dr. Stankovic, transcript page 43463. Dr. Christopher Lawrence, transcript page 14802, 14804, and Mr. Petrarelli at 18442, 18443. Your Honor, Judge Ori even said this was common knowledge, transcript page 14803. The prosecution has scoffed at such a suggestion, but the prosecution's evidence indicates that ligatures and blindfolds found in Srebrenica mass graves, including loose in the grave, were sometimes pink or red in color and brown with flowers. P1735, P1740. And now let's look here at some of the photographic evidence of ABIH fighters with bandanas and ribbons. We have the extracts from the videos that are in e-court as D339 and D340, respectively. And here, the last 2 on the slide are most instructive. These are actual images of actual ABIH fighters from the Srebrenica column when they arrived in Tuzla. And so, Your Honors, reasonable doubt is raised that some victims of execution are actually combat casualties buried with bandana and identifying ribbons, not blindfolds or ligatures. Your Honors, no matter where one picks to investigate more fully, the Srebrenica evidence falls apart as to General Mladić. The prosecution is relying on you to fill in the blanks in the evidence with the story you would have expected to hear. They did not do their job, and major gaps remain. Reasonable doubt exists. Therefore, the only appropriate and fair remedy is to enter an acquittal of General Mladić. I next move to count 11, hostage taking. UN personnel actively participated in the war. There was thus a legitimate basis to detain. The prosecution provided a flat narrative driven by criminal intent without the full picture. If we can have the first slide. Witness Dragicevic's statement described the legitimate detention of UN personnel. Quote, specific elements of UNPROFOR forces were actively involved in guiding the NATO aviation and rapid intervention forces towards Serbian targets. Removing them from their positions eliminated the possibility of them guiding the Air Force and artillery. This was in essence a protective and defense measure, end quote. It bears emphasizing that the human shields allegations of hostage taking is primarily only 10 to 20 detainees over 1 or 2 days. While UN detainees were held at Serb locations, the precise locations were never conveyed to deter anyone. Count 11 fails because of 1, a defective indictment, and 2, the evidence fails to prove each element. Count 11 is defective for 3 reasons. First, the prosecution imported the common Article 3 language, non-international armed conflicts, to charge a situation involving internationalized conflict. If you can have the next slide. the prosecution confused the determination that Common Article 3 may be applicable to non-international and international armed conflicts as relieving the prosecution of their duty to charge the correct language. That confusion is evident at transcript page 44323. How is charging the language alleging a non-international conflict proper in the situation of an internationalized armed conflict? No conviction against the accused can be entered when material facts are omitted. We get that from the Mladić case, the decision on the accused's motion for relief from defects in the indictment, 30 September 2014, paragraph 15. How can a chamber find an international armed conflict when it is not pleaded? Moreover, abandoning Common Article 3's exclusive application to non-international conflicts undermines customary law. Second, the prosecution's failure to notify about material facts. While Common Article 3 may apply to international and non-international armed conflicts, this does not alleviate the prosecution of pleading their case. Importing Common Article 3 failed to specify any internationalized chapeau a material fact. The prosecution has not cured this by providing, quote, timely, clear, and consistent information detailing the factual basis, end quote, as was required in the Mladić case on the same decision we mentioned, paragraph 15. Notice of, quote, all IHL, end quote, is insufficient and prejudiced the defense. Third, if the character of the conflict is irrelevant as to Common Article 3, as the Mladić appeal decision implies, that's the Mladić decision on appeal of trial chamber's decision on preliminary motion to dismiss count 11 of the indictment, 9 July 1992, paragraph 25. This improperly lowers the prosecution burden. Alleviating proof of this element undermines a fair trial. It enables the prosecution to more easily prove the alleged crime, and therefore count 11 is defective. Are we at the time for the break, Your Honors?
Yes, we are at the time for the break, but before we take the break, I think you refer to me of a matter of common knowledge at page, let me check that.
It should have been 14803 according to my notes.
14803, let's just check. I think perhaps something else was recorded. Yes, you said 14083, or at least that's how it's transcribed. And couldn't find it there, but it's now explained. We'll take a break and we resume at 5 minutes, 25 minutes to 2 o'clock. Are you on schedule, Mr. Mladić? Because otherwise we might have to take measures.
I have caught up some time, but I'm still behind, and it looks like I'm probably behind at least 20, 25 minutes.
Yes, then you haven't caught up that much, because yesterday it was, I think, 15 to 20 minutes. So you lost more time. Let me just consult with my colleagues. We'll ask Mr. Register to find out whether it would be possible to grant you 20 extra minutes, and we'll then go on until 25 minutes to 3 o'clock, if it's feasible. We take a break now, and in order not to lose further time, we'll resume at 25 minutes to 2 o'clock.
All rise. Veuillez vous lever.